They say there's nothing scarier than a mother's wrath. They're wrong. The only thing scarier than a mother's wrath is a mother's composure. That dead calm that comes when love has burned to ashes, leaving behind only cinders and perfectly precise calculation. My children decided I was an old, unnecessary asset. An apartment in the city center that could be sold for a profit, and the old woman herself could be written off. An elegant plan. A one-way cruise, a forged dementia certificate, and a farewell dinner with crocodile tears. They thought they were sending a docile sheep to the slaughter. They just didn't know one thing. I heard everything, I saw everything, I understood everything. And while they were choosing new cars with the money from my not yet sold apartment, I was preparing my own farewell gift for them. A gift that turned their cozy, prosperous little world into a scorched desert. They thought they had bought me a one-way ticket. Naive. This ticket was for them. Want to see how empires built on betrayal crumble? Subscribe, we have a lot of that here and we serve justice cold. The table was groaning with my signature pies and salads, the very ones whose recipes Sophie, my son's wife, had been unsuccessfully trying to get out of me for the last 10 years. The champagne, bought by my son-in-law, Anthony, sparkled in the crystal glasses left over from my husband's and my wedding. Everything was sickeningly perfect, like a postcard. A happy family seeing off their beloved mother and grandmother on vacation. My children, William and Isabella, sat at the head of the table and gave toasts. They talked about how I deserved this cruise, how grateful they were to me for everything, how much they would miss me these 3 weeks. I smiled, nodded, even dabbed the corner of my eye with a handkerchief when William got particularly emotional. Inside there was nothing. Emptiness. A cold, ringing emptiness, the kind you find in a chilled winter house. Years teach you that the loudest words of gratitude are spoken when they want to hide the most unseemly deeds. I raised my glass. My hands trembled slightly, but I blamed it on excitement. Thank you, children, thank you, my dears. I am so touched by your care. A lump in my throat made it hard to speak, but I swallowed it. I had been swallowing these lumps my whole life. I swallowed it when I sold the country house to pay off William's debts. I swallowed it when I sat with my little granddaughter while Isabella and her husband were vacationing in Spain. I swallowed it when I listened to Sophie's reproaches about my outdated views on life. This lump was my eternal companion. It was Sophie, my dear daughter-in-law, who delivered the first blow disguised as always as a clumsy joke. Eleanor, she sang, pouring herself more champagne. You be careful with the cocktails on that liner. You know, you might mistake the captain for a dementor, like in those movies of yours. She giggled theatrically. We'll be worried. A polite, strained laughter went around the table. I felt the blood drain from my face. My blood pressure must have shot up. I smiled as widely as I could, feeling the skin at the corners of my lips crack. Don't worry, Sophie. I'm still in my right mind. For now. But the final shot, the one that was supposed to break me completely, came a little later. I went to the kitchen for the main course, a duck with apples that I had been roasting since 5 in the morning. The door was ajar, and I heard the quiet but distinct whisper of my daughter, my Isabella, to her husband. Did you talk to her about the phone? She asked. The main thing is that she accidentally drops it in the sea on the first day. The less contact there is, the easier it will be for us to prove later that she's lost her mind and has gone missing somewhere. The neurologist said that a lack of contact with family is an important symptom. There was a ringing in my ears, the world swayed. I grabbed the doorframe to keep from falling. I couldn't breathe. So that visit to the doctor wasn't an accident. It was a plan, a thought-out, cold-blooded plan to get rid of me and take possession of the apartment. A one-way ticket. I had always known that cruises went both ways, but mine apparently was an exception. I slowly, very slowly, exhaled, straightened up, and took the platter with the duck, which had suddenly become incredibly heavy. I don't remember how the evening ended. I only remember the hugs, as fake as Christmas ornaments. I remember the kisses on the cheek as cold as ice. And then the front door lock clicked, and I was left alone. The silence was deafening. I slowly walked to the large mirror in the hallway, the very one I had looked into on my wedding day. An tired, elderly woman with dull eyes looked back at me. I looked at her for a few seconds, and then something strange happened. The tears that had been in my eyes dried up, simply disappeared. My shoulders, which had been slumped under the weight of resentment, straightened. My gaze became hard-focused. In my eyes, there was no longer Eleanor, the all-forgiving mother and grandmother. Someone else was being born there. My gaze slid to the dresser. On it lay the bright brochures of the cruise company and the ticket. Next to them was a small, inconspicuous metal key that I had picked up that morning. The key to a bank safe deposit box. My real ticket. A ticket to a new life. Their game was over. Mine was just beginning. If you also believe that self-respect is more important than toxic family ties, subscribe. Here we learn to say enough. The silence in the apartment was oppressive, but it was a healing silence. It was like the peace that comes after a long, debilitating illness. I sat in the old armchair, the very one that Michael and I had bought for our first anniversary. Creaky, worn, but infinitely familiar. I had spent thousands of hours in this chair, rocking first William, then Isabella in my arms. In this chair, I had knitted their first booties and read them fairy tales. And now in this same chair, I was burying my motherly love. They say it's unnatural for a parent to bury their child. But what about burying your love for them? Memory is a strange thing. It's a scavenger. It helpfully served up pictures from the past, which now looked completely different. Here I am at 25, standing with my resignation from graduate school. My academic advisor, a gray-haired professor, is shaking his head. Eleanor, you have brilliant prospects. Your dissertation is almost ready. And I'm smiling and answering, I've had a son. He is now my main dissertation. I gave up a career as an economist to become a professional mother. I thought it was the most reliable investment. How wrong I was. Here I am at 40. Isabella, my beautiful daughter, is getting married. A wedding, a white dress, everything as it should be. And a year later, a tearful phone call. Mom, we want to get a mortgage, but we're a little short on the down payment. Just a little. I didn't sleep all night, and in the morning, I went to a pawn shop and took my mother's ring with a small ruby off my finger, the only memory of her. When I gave the money to Isabella, she glanced at my hand. Mom, where's the ring? I lost it. I mumbled something about it being broken and that I had given it to be repaired. She immediately forgot about it. 5 years later, she and Anthony sold that apartment, bought a bigger one, and didn't even invite me to the housewarming. They said, "We're having a party for young people, you'll be bored." I swallowed that too. And here's a very recent picture just 3 years ago. My late husband, Michael, is already seriously ill. He looks at me with tired but all-understanding eyes. Eleanor, he says quietly, almost in a whisper, your heart is a bottomless well. I've admired it my whole life. But they don't come to it to drink clean water. They come to see what else of value can be thrown into it, to test its depth. I had brushed it off then, said he was exaggerating, that the children loved us. Michael only gave a bitter smile. Love is not measured in words but in deeds. Remember that. He died a month later. And after his death, they started coming even more often. Not to me, to my well. William urgently needed money for a promising startup. Isabella for a new car. Because she was ashamed to be seen in the old one in front of her friends. I sat with their children, canceling my plans, trips to a sanatorium, meetings with friends. I became a function. A free nanny, a reliable ATM. A personal chef for family holidays. I gave them everything, time, health, my last savings. I thought that's how it should be, that this was a mother's duty. I got up from the chair and went to the window. The night city was burning with millions of lights. Somewhere out there, in one of those glowing boxes, my children were now celebrating their victory. They were sure they had gotten rid of their old, unnecessary mother. They thought they had taken everything from me. But they were wrong. They had only taken what I had allowed them to take. I had saved my main asset. My mind, my will, and my memory. The memory of everything they had done. And this memory had now become my main weapon. She thought she had given them everything, but they would come to take the last. You simply can't miss this. A cold epiphany doesn't come suddenly, like a lightning strike. It creeps up gradually like dampness in an old house. At first, you don't pay attention to the barely noticeable spots on the wallpaper. Then you feel a slight smell of decay, and only when it starts to drip from the ceiling do you realize that the foundation has long since rotted. My home, my faith in my children had collapsed in just the same way, slowly and inevitably. I started to notice the first spots on the wallpaper about 6 months ago. William, my businesslike and perpetually busy son, suddenly began to show a strange interest in my utility bills. "Mom, let me get a general power of attorney in my name," he would say, looking over my shoulder as I filled out the receipts. "I'll pay for everything for you. It's hard for you to go to the post office. For convenience." I had refused then, citing the fact that I liked to walk to the post office. Something in his tone, too oily, too caring, had alerted me. He wasn't used to caring about my convenience. He was used to using it. Then there was Isabella. During one of her rare visits, while looking through old photographs, she asked as if casually, "Mom, have you written a will? We should get all the documents in order. You understand at your age." I had joked that I was going to live forever, but her question hung in the air. She wasn't asking out of concern for order. She wanted to make sure that the main prize, my 3-bedroom apartment in the city center, was securely assigned to them. But all these were just harbingers. The real collapse happened 3 weeks ago. That day divided my life into before and after. I had run out of my blood pressure pills, and I went to our local clinic for a new prescription. The day was hectic. The corridors were crowded with people. Leaving the therapist's office, I headed for the exit and suddenly froze. At the far end of the corridor, by the door with the sign Neurology Department, Room 214, Professor Albright, stood my daughter Isabella. She was talking animatedly on the phone, covering her mouth with her hand. I instinctively stepped behind a column. Professor Albright was a city celebrity. His specialty was cognitive disorders in the elderly, dementia, Alzheimer's disease, senile dementia. The waiting list to see him was a month long. What could my 42-year-old, perfectly healthy daughter be doing at his office? The door opened and a nurse came out, handing Isabella a thick blue folder. Isabella took it, and for a second the folder turned towards me. I couldn't be mistaken. In large printed letters on the label was written, "Outpatient card of the patient, Eleanor Sokolova." My name, my last name. At that moment I stopped breathing. The blood pounded in my temples so loudly that I went deaf. Isabella, not noticing anything, quickly put the folder in her large bag and almost ran towards another exit. And I remained standing behind the column, clutching it with whitened fingers so as not to slide to the floor. An information bomb had exploded in my head, destroying everything I had believed in. This was not a spontaneous decision. This was a plan. They were preparing the ground, gathering evidence of my incompetence. Visits to a fashionable neurologist, a fake medical file, persistent offers of help with documents, and finally this cruise as the cherry on top. The perfect trap. To send an old mother on a trip from which she would not return, or would return completely inadequate, and to calmly enter into the rites of inheritance. I don't remember how I got home. I was walking on autopilot, and a puzzle was forming in my head. Every detail, every red flag fell into place. The pain that should have torn me apart for some reason did not come. Instead, a crystalline, icy clarity came. The clarity of a surgeon who looks at an X-ray and sees a tumor that requires immediate removal. The memory of the blue folder in my daughter's hands became the point after which self-pity and pity for them died. I sat in my armchair, my hands no longer trembling. I picked up the phone, found a number in my address book that I hadn't dialed in many years. The rings went on for a long time. Finally, a creaky but familiar voice answered on the other end. "Hello. Simon? Hello. It's Eleanor, Michael's wife." There was a silence on the other end. "Eleanor. I didn't expect it. Did something happen?" I took a deep breath. "Yes. I've decided. Let's launch our project." They say the most important decisions in life are made in complete silence. Not in a scream, not in tears, but in that deafening silence that comes after a storm, when the air still smells of ozone and the soul is ashes. My conversation with Simon was short and businesslike. I hung up and froze. Something inside me shifted, turned with a heavy creak, like a rusted mechanism, and fell into place. It was pity that died, a mother's pity, which had made me forgive, understand, and justify them again and again. I had always thought that they were my flesh and blood. That evening I realized that for them I was square meters in a bank account, a real estate asset. My love for them was not a gift, but an annoying encumbrance that had to be tolerated for the sake of future gain. My health was not a cause for joy, but an annoying obstacle that delayed the moment of receiving the inheritance. They didn't wish me ill. No, it was much simpler. They wished me non-existence. A quiet, inconspicuous, legally clean non-existence. The voice in my head, the one that for decades had whispered to me, "They are just children you have to forgive," suddenly fell silent. It was replaced by another, calm, cold, similar to the voice of my late economist husband. And this voice spoke to me in the language of numbers and facts. "Eleanor," it said, "you have been a good investor all your life. You invested in education, in real estate, in stocks. But your main project, children, turned out to be not just unprofitable. It turned out to be a fraudulent scheme, a financial pyramid where you were the only investor." And I realized that he was right. I looked at my life not as a mother but as an auditor. Here are my investments. 20 years of my life, 3 sold real estate properties, a country house, a garage, a room in a communal apartment, all my gold, all my savings. And what was the return? What were the dividends? Fake care, a one-way ticket, and a blue folder with my name in the hands of my daughter, coming out of the office of a dementia specialist. The balance didn't add up. At that moment, I stopped being a mother to them. I became a creditor. A tough, ruthless creditor who had come to collect her debts with interest. And no anger, no rage, only a cold, clear resolve, as clear as the winter air. I went to the table and took a clean sheet of paper. My hand didn't tremble, my breathing was even, my back was straight. I began to draw up a plan. Not a plan of revenge, a plan for the rehabilitation of assets. First point, real estate. The apartment. The main prize for which they were fighting. It had to be taken out of the game quickly, quietly, without a trace. Second point, finances. All the savings that were still in my accounts. They had to be made invisible, unattainable, like water that has seeped through sand. Third point, the legend. My departure, my disappearance. Everything had to look exactly as they wanted. They themselves had given me the perfect script. I just had to play my role to the end. Fourth point, the most important, security. I had to disappear for real, not only for them but for the whole world. To lie low and wait. Wait for them to make their move. I looked at this list and in my chest, instead of the usual pain and longing, a new unfamiliar feeling was born. It was a feeling of control. For the first time in many years, I was not floating along with the current of their desires and demands. I was building a dam myself, I was changing the course of the river myself. I thought this would break me completely. How naive I was. It didn't break me, it forged me anew. From the soft, pliable clay of a mother's love, a cold, sharp blade was formed. And this blade was ready to strike. We're approaching the moment that will turn everything upside down. Stay with us, it's about to get even more intense. Simon lived in an old professor's apartment near the university, filled with bookshelves from floor to ceiling. It smelled of old paper, good tobacco, and strong tea. He was the same age as my late husband. They had been friends since their student days. Gray-haired, thin, with piercing, very lively eyes behind old-fashioned glasses. He didn't ask any unnecessary questions when I called. He just said, "Come, Eleanor. I'll be waiting." I told him everything. About the blue folder in my daughter's hands, about the one-way cruise, about my decision. I spoke evenly, without emotion, as if I were reading a stock market report. He listened in silence, only occasionally nodding. His fingers with long thin nails tapped on the lid of an old box. When I finished, he stood up, went to the window, and looked out at the street for a long time. Michael always said that you let them get away with too much, he finally said without turning around. He said, "They'll eat her alive, Simon, if she doesn't show them her teeth in time." It seems he was right. He was right about everything, I answered quietly. I understand that now. Simon turned around. There was no pity in his eyes, only respect. All right, he said in a businesslike manner. We don't have much time. The plan must be flawless. Do you just want to take back what's yours? Or do you want to punish them? I want justice, Simon, I answered. And sometimes justice looks like punishment. He became the brain of my operation. He was not just an old economics professor. He was a brilliant practitioner who in the 90s had consulted many of those who now owned factories and banks. He knew all the loopholes, all the pitfalls. He was that very still water in which, as they say, the most dangerous devils are found. It was he who found a buyer for my apartment. Not a private person, which could have aroused suspicion. The buyer was a closed-end investment fund from Luxembourg, specializing in real estate in Eastern Europe. A faceless, opaque structure, whose real owners were almost impossible to trace. The deal was conducted through a trusted notary, and the price was slightly below the market price for maximum speed. Speed and silence. Our main allies, Simon would say. The day came 3 days before my supposed departure. The morning was gray and rainy. Simon and I were sitting in the notary's waiting room. I was dressed in my best suit, the one I only wore on the most solemn occasions. Today was just such an occasion, the triumph of justice. The notary, a portly man with tired eyes, brought out the documents. A thick stack of paper that was supposed to cross out my entire past life. The purchase and sale agreement. A deed of gift for all the remaining funds in favor of an anonymous charitable foundation that Simon curated, and a general power of attorney in Simon's name to manage all my future financial income. I took the pen. Inside there was no fear, no doubt, only silence. Years teach you that the most important decisions are made not in tears, but in complete silence. I signed each sheet. The flourish was firm, confident. The signature under the contract for the sale of the apartment where I had lived for 40 years, where my children had grown up, was as clear as all the others. I wasn't selling a house. I was amputating painful memories. When the last signature was in place, the notary took the documents and went out to put the seals on them. Simon and I were left alone in the office. He looked at me for a long time and then quietly, almost in a whisper, he asked, "Eleanor, do you understand there's no going back? This is the point of no return." I looked up at him. For the first time in many days, I felt a light, almost imperceptible smile touch the corners of my lips. The way back leads to an abyss, Simon. I'm only going forward. My refuge was Simon's old country house, in a dacha community 100 kilometers from the city. A small but sturdy wooden house, surrounded by a high solid fence and ancient pines. It was quiet here, smelling of pine needles and damp earth. The perfect place to disappear. Simon brought me here at night, right after the visit to the notary. My cruise was supposed to start in only 2 days, and I spent those 2 days covering my tracks. I disconnected the landline, paid all the bills a month in advance, and left the keys with a neighbor to water the flowers. Everything had to look as if I were really going on a long trip. On the evening of my departure, Simon and I sat on the enclosed veranda. He brewed a strong tea with thyme. I baked a simple apple charlotte. It was raining outside. For the first time in many years, I felt completely safe. It was here, in this silence, that Simon initiated me into the details of the financial part of our plan. I was an economist, but his combinations were higher mathematics for me. "So, Eleanor, listen carefully," he began, drawing diagrams on a napkin. "Tomorrow at 9 in the morning Moscow time, the money from the sale of the apartment will be credited to your transit account. At exactly 9:05, I, under your power of attorney, will transfer the entire amount to a brokerage account. We won't keep it there for a minute. Half of the amount will go to the purchase of bearer government bonds. They are impossible to trace, and they are not subject to seizure in most civil lawsuits. This is our stabilization fund. He took a sip of tea and continued. His eyes were shining with excitement. The second half is our strike force. We will convert it into 3 different cryptocurrencies through a Swiss exchange. Don't ask which ones. That's my trade secret. The keys to the wallets will be stored right here. He tapped on an old box that always stood on his table. A physical carrier. No cloud storage. Even if your children hire the best hackers in the world, they won't find anything. For them, this money simply doesn't exist. It has evaporated. I listened to him and a strange feeling came over me. It was like reading a gripping detective novel. Only I was the main character. And what about me? I asked. They'll be looking for me, won't they? Of course they will, Simon smirked. But not right away. First, they'll let you get lost a week, maybe 2. They'll feign panic, call the cruise company. And then when they realize that the apartment is gone, the real hunt will begin. But by that time you'll be far away. I'm not going anywhere, I said firmly. I'll be here in this house. I want to be nearby when the mousetrap snaps shut. I want to hear the squeak of the mice who have discovered that the cheese is gone. Simon looked at me for a long time, studying me. That's dangerous, Eleanor. They might find you. Let them, I answered. My plan is not to run away. My plan is to look them in the eye when they realize they've lost. I won't hide. I will wait. The tickets for the cruise ship, which my children had presented to me with such pomp, lay on the table. Bright, glossy paper, gold embossing. A bait. They thought they were sending me on a one-way trip, not knowing that I had long since disembarked from their ship and was sailing my own course. They thought they were playing chess with an old, tired pawn. They just hadn't realized yet that I was the queen who had swept all their pieces off the board with a single move. I took the tickets and held them to the fire in the fireplace. The paper flared up, curling and blackening. For a moment, the golden letters stood out on the ashes. An unforgettable journey. I gave a bitter smile. The journey did indeed promise to be unforgettable, especially for my children. Now you will learn the truth that will shock you to the core. Get ready. I spent the first week enjoying the silence. I walked a lot in the pine forest, read the books I hadn't had time to read in the last 30 years, and slept for 10 hours a day. I didn't think about them. I knew they weren't thinking about me either. They had given me time to get lost. Simon called once a day at the same time to report that everything was going according to plan. The money had been successfully withdrawn and had dissolved into the global financial ocean. My fortress was built, the moat was dug, the bridges were raised. I was waiting for the assault. The assault began exactly 8 days after my departure, just as Simon had predicted. William and Isabella were sitting in the conference room of an expensive real estate agency. On the table in front of them were cups of fragrant coffee in porcelain cups. They were dressed to the nines and were putting on a show of grief-stricken but responsible children. You see, William was saying to the realtor, a respectable man in a perfectly tailored suit. Mom has always been a bit eccentric and lately she's really been slipping. The doctors have given her a grim diagnosis. We have all the documents here. Isabella nodded in agreement, tragically rolling her eyes. We are so worried about her. She went on this cruise without saying goodbye to almost anyone. Her phone is off. We are simply forced to take matters into our own hands. The apartment needs to be sold to provide her with decent care in a good nursing home. She wiped away an invisible tear and placed that same blue folder from Professor Albright on the table. The realtor nodded sympathetically, took the documents, and sat down at his huge computer. I understand you perfectly, he said, typing quickly on the keyboard. Let's check the property in the database for any encumbrances. So, Eleanor Sokolova, 5 Forest Street, apartment 42. Is that correct? Yes, that's correct, William confirmed impatiently, already mentally calculating the future profit. The realtor frowned, his fingers frozen over the keyboard. He looked at the screen again, then at William and Isabella. I'm sorry, there's some kind of mistake here, he said slowly. What kind of mistake? Isabella asked irritably. Well, the realtor took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. According to the Unified State Register, this property no longer belongs to you. It was sold 2 weeks ago. A silence fell in the room. William and Isabella exchanged glances. What nonsense! William was the first to recover. That can't be. We are her children. She couldn't have sold the apartment without our knowledge. Nevertheless, the realtor turned the monitor towards them. Here is the extract. The owner is a closed-end investment fund, Europa Invest. The deal is clean, registered according to all the rules. I'm very sorry. The crash in real time was like a car accident in slow motion. There they are, flying out of the agency's office onto the street. There's Isabella, starting to scream at William, waving her arms. It's your fault. I told you. We should have forced the power of attorney. You missed everything. There's William, as pale as a sheet, trying to answer her, but his lips are trembling. They are frantically dialing my number. Again and again. The subscriber's device is switched off, or is out of the network coverage area. This phrase sounded to them like a death sentence. That same evening, William was sitting in his office. His business, his beautiful life, his status, all of it was built on the promise of future money from the sale of my apartment. Now a chasm had opened up at his feet. The phone was ringing off the hook with calls from his furious sister and worried creditors. In despair, he rejected another call and threw the phone on the table. The phone immediately rang again. An unknown number with no caller ID. In a rage, William grabbed the phone, ready to vent all his anger on whoever was on the other end. "Hello," he roared. There was a silence on the line for a second, and then a calm, even horrifyingly familiar voice was heard. My voice. "Hello, son. It seems you're having some real estate problems." A heavy, ringing silence hung on the other end. I could hear William gasping for air, like a fish thrown on the shore. I imagined his face, pale, blotchy, his eyes darting in panic. I waited. I had learned to wait. "Mom," he finally forced out. His voice was alien, hoarse. "Mommy, is that you? Where are you? We were going crazy with worry. We thought something had happened to you." The performance continued, pathetic, unconvincing, but it was all they had. "No need for this farce, William," I answered evenly, articulating each word. My voice sounded calm, maybe even too calm. "Let's not waste my time or yours. I take it you familiarized yourself with the new status of my former property." This phrase had the effect of a whiplash. The mask of the caring son fell from him in an instant. "What have you done?" he shrieked, his voice cracking into a falsetto. "Have you completely lost your mind? Where is the money from the apartment? You had no right to sell it. It's our inheritance." First of all, William, an inheritance is received after death. As you can see, I am more alive than ever. Second, it was my apartment, and I disposed of my property as I saw fit. I simply closed one old and profitable asset. "An asset?" he choked with rage. "You call our home an asset?" "Exactly," I confirmed with an icy calm. "And as practice has shown, an extremely risky and toxic one. Any competent investor in my place would have gotten rid of it long ago." I heard some noise on the other end, and then Isabella's hysterical voice joined the conversation. Apparently, he had put it on speaker. "Mommy, what are you doing?" she sobbed into the phone. "Think again. Sophie will leave William. They have a mortgage. Anthony is threatening to file for divorce. We were counting on that money to support his business. You're destroying our families. Don't you have a heart?" There it was. Manipulation. Their last trump card. Before, it would have worked without fail. I would have been crying along with her, promising to fix everything, to give everything back. But now inside me was not a beating bundle of nerves, but a cold, smooth stone. "Isabella," I said just as evenly, "your calculations are your commercial risks. You bet on an unreliable source of funding. Your investment did not pay off. This happens all the time in the market. You should have diversified your assets, not put all your eggs in one basket." They both fell silent, stunned. They didn't know how to talk to this new version of their mother. They were used to a soft, all-forgiving woman. and they had run into a soulless financial analyst. You're not a mother, you're a monster," William hissed. "You're right," I agreed. "Your mother died on the day you sent her on a one-way cruise with a fake dementia certificate in her pocket. You killed her yourselves. And I am just the administrator of her property. And I have disposed of it in the most effective way. But you're our mother." Isabella cried out in a last desperate attempt to appeal to my feelings. I paused, letting this phrase hang in the air and die. "That role in my life is closed," I finally said. "Its expiration date has passed. And now listen to me carefully, both of you. Don't call me again. If I deem it necessary, I will contact you myself. I have a lot to do." And I pressed the end call button. I was sitting in the silence of my new home. Outside the window, the pines were rustling. My chest was calm. On the other end of the line, 100 kilometers away, their world was collapsing. And in my world, for the first time in many years, order reigned. If your heart is pounding with righteous anger right now, you understand me. Subscribe to the channel. Here we find our strength. About a month passed. The phone was silent. This silence was deceptive. I knew it. It was the calm before the final battle. I learned to live in my little house, got my life in order. In the mornings, I would work in the garden, in the afternoons, I would read a lot, and in the evenings, I would sit by the fireplace, sorting through old papers and photographs. I was doing what I should have done a long time ago, taking inventory of my life. They came on a Saturday evening. I was sitting on the veranda with a cup of tea and a book when an unfamiliar black car appeared on the dirt road, raising clouds of dust. It stopped at my gate. My heart didn't skip a beat. I just calmly put my book aside and waited. They got out of the car, William and Isabella. They looked terrible. William had lost weight. He was gaunt, with dark circles under his eyes. His expensive jacket hung on him as if on a hanger. Isabella was without makeup, with a swollen, tear-stained face. They looked like two bankrupt aristocrats. I didn't move. I watched them open the gate and slowly walk towards me down the path. They were apparently expecting anything. Screams, reproaches, hysterics. But my calmness, my stillness, disarmed them. They stopped a few steps from the porch. William broke first. His face contorted. He fell to his knees right in the road dust. "Mom!" he shouted, and it was not a cry of anger but a cry of despair. "Mom, forgive me, forgive us, idiots. We've understood everything. We were blind, we were ungrateful creatures. Forgive me if you can." He crawled towards me on his knees, trying to catch my hand to kiss it. Pulled it away. Isabella stood behind him and cried, covering her face with her hands. It was a well-rehearsed performance. The final act of a tragedy. Repentant children. I looked at my son crawling at my feet and I felt nothing. No gloating, no pity. Only the cold curiosity of an entomologist observing the behavior of an insect. "We'll return everything, Mom," he continued, raising his face, full of tears, to me. "I'll sell the car, Sophie will sell her jewelry. We'll work 3 jobs. We'll pay you alimony however much you say. Just forgive us, we can't live without you." He spoke for a long time, incoherently, choking on his words and tears. He talked about how they loved me, how they hadn't slept at night, how ashamed they were. I was silent. I let him talk, let him pour out all this lie to the last drop. And when he fell silent, exhausted, the moment of truth came. He looked at me with a last desperate hope and said the phrase that became his verdict. "Mom, I've realized everything. Forgive us. You will." He hesitated. His gaze darted around. "You will give us at least a part of the money, just for the first time, to settle the most urgent debts. And then we'll return everything, down to the last penny, I swear." There it was, the unmasking of the manipulator. Bingo! He didn't feel sorry for me. He felt sorry for his debts. His tears were not tears of remorse. They were tears of fear of his creditors. At that moment, the last, thinnest thread that still connected me to him broke. I slowly stood up. They both flinched. "Yes," I said quietly, but so that they could hear every word. "I have left something for you." A greedy, impatient hope flashed across William's face. He apparently decided that his performance had been a success. He thought I would now bring him a bank book or the keys to a new safe deposit box. I went into the house. They remained waiting on the porch. I went to the fireplace, on the mantelpiece of which stood an old carved box. In it, I had kept the most precious things all my life. William's first booties, a lock of Isabella's hair, our wedding photos with Michael, letters, my family archive. I took the box and went back out onto the veranda, holding it out to William. His hands trembled. He awkwardly, hastily opened the lid, expecting to see gold or wads of money, but in the box was only a gray, lifeless ash. He stared at it, not understanding anything, then he raised a crazed look to me. "This is all that's left of your childhood photographs and my memories," I explained calmly. "I burned them yesterday. This is your only inheritance. And now get off my land." They left without another word. William, staggering, got up from his knees. His face was the color of the ash in the box, which he still hadn't let go of. Isabella looked at me with a mute, animal horror. They got into their black car and disappeared as quickly as they had appeared. I was left alone on the porch, breathing in the cool evening air. I felt no triumph, I felt no hatred. I felt only a huge, all-encompassing relief, as if a heavy, wet sheepskin coat that I had been wearing for 68 years had been taken off my shoulders. After that, a real silence set in. A week passed, then a month, then late autumn came. The trees shed their leaves, and in the mornings there was frost on the grass. My life entered a calm, measured course. I knew that the domino effect had been set in motion. All I had to do was wait for Simon to bring me a report from the battlefield. That call came on one of the cold November evenings. I was sitting by the fireplace, wrapped in a blanket. The logs were crackling in the fire. "Hello, Eleanor." Simon's voice on the line was as calm as ever. "I have some news for you. Financial analytics, so to speak." "I'm listening, Simon," I answered, looking at the dance of the fire. "Let's start with William," he began. As we suspected, his promising startup was a house of cards. He took out loans from 3 banks against verbal guarantees, and as collateral for the future sale of your apartment. When the creditors realized that there was no collateral and there wouldn't be, they filed a class action lawsuit. The trial was yesterday. He was declared bankrupt. All his property, including his car and his wife's share in the apartment, will be auctioned off. He paused. And also, his wife, Sophie, filed for divorce and division of property the very next day after he returned from your place. She is a very pragmatic woman. She decided to save what could still be saved. So our William is now not only a bankrupt, but also a divorced man in 5 minutes, registered in the rubber-stamped apartment of his former business partner. The domino effect. The first tile fell, knocking over the next. "And what about Isabella?" I asked just as calmly. "With Isabella, the story is similar, but with a female touch," Simon continued. "Her husband, Anthony, as it turned out, was also counting on your inheritance for the development of his business. When he realized that there would be no cash flow, he simply packed his things and left in an unknown direction. He left Isabella a farewell note and all their joint debts. The bank has already sent her a notice of late payment on the mortgage. If she doesn't make a payment within a month, the apartment will be taken away, and she has nothing to pay with. She was fired from her job for constant absenteeism and hysterics." I was silent. I saw this picture as clearly as if I were watching a movie. Here is William, who was so proud of his status, now hiding from creditors. Here is Isabella, who was so afraid of appearing in front of her friends in an old car, now afraid of being evicted onto the street. Here are Sophie and Anthony, their faithful life partners, who turned out to be ordinary predators who had fled a sinking ship. Their ideal families, built on the foundation of my money and expectations, had crumbled to dust as soon as the source had run out. They, by the way, managed to quarrel, Simon added. They blamed each other for everything. He shouted that it was she with her idea of a dementia certificate who had ruined everything. She shrieked that it was he with his greed who had rushed and scared you. It seems that nothing is left of their brotherly love either. He fell silent and then he asked the main question. A question not as a financier but as a friend. Eleanor, do you have any regrets? Not a drop. I moved my gaze from the fire to the dark window, in which the room and my calm face were reflected. The first snow was beginning to fall outside. It slowly and silently covered the ground with a white shroud. One regrets mistakes, Simon, I answered quietly, about wrongly made decisions. And this was the only right decision in my entire life. Almost a year passed. The first snow that I had seen from the window of Simon's country house had long since melted, giving way to the green of spring and then to a hot summer. I didn't stay in one place either. The old house that had served as my fortress, I sold it, and I returned the money to Simon with immense gratitude. He refused for a long time, but I insisted. My war was over and I no longer needed bastions. I needed a home. I found it 300 miles from my past life, in a small sun-drenched seaside town. It smelled of salt, fried fish, and blooming magnolia. I bought a tiny apartment with a balcony overlooking the sea, and with the rest of the money, I fulfilled a lifelong dream that I had almost forgotten. I opened a small second-hand bookstore with a coffee shop on the first floor of an old house. I called it the Quiet Harbor. My life now consisted of simple but so important things. In the morning, I would open the shop, make coffee, the aroma of which mixed with the smell of old books. Locals and a few tourists would come in. I knew almost all my customers by name. We didn't talk about the exchange rate or real estate prices. We talked about books, about the sea, about the weather. I was no longer an ATM, a nanny, or a function. I was Eleanor, the owner of the Quiet Harbor, where you could always have the most delicious coffee in town. One day, looking at my reflection in the shop window, I caught myself thinking that I almost didn't recognize this woman. The perpetual crease of anxiety between my eyebrows had disappeared. The wrinkles around my lips, which used to be pressed into a tight, tense line, had smoothed out. A calm, elderly woman with clear eyes in which the light of the southern sun was splashing looked back at me from the mirror. I thought that after everything I had done, I would be tormented by guilt or emptiness. I was wrong. I had found peace. It was not the gloating of a victor, but the serenity of a person who had finally returned home. I had achieved a double liberation. I had sold the house full of ghosts of the past and had broken the bonds that had been suffocating me. The postman, a cheerful young man named Kevin, would come to me every day for a cup of espresso. On one of those days, he handed me not only the newspapers, but also a real paper envelope. The address was written in an unfamiliar, angular handwriting. For the first time in a long time, my heart trembled. The letter was from my granddaughter, Anna, Isabella's daughter. She had gone to college in another city last year. I sat at my table by the window and opened the envelope. The letter was short. Hello, Grandma. I don't know if you'll get this letter. Simon gave me this address. I just want you to know. I know everything. Dad told me when he was drunk. I haven't spoken to them since. I'm ashamed of them. I would like to come and visit you for the holidays if you'll let me. Just to hug you. Your granddaughter, Anna. I finished reading the letter and looked out the window at the sparkling sea in the distance. A tear rolled down my cheek. But it was not a tear of grief or resentment. It was a tear of quiet, bright joy. The old, rotten tree of my family had fallen, but one young, healthy shoot had still broken through to the sun. They say that forgiveness is the lot of the strong. And I think that sometimes the greatest strength is to say enough in time and to take back what is yours. I am almost 70 years old, but for the first time in my life, I don't owe anyone anything. And you know what? It's the best feeling in the world. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Stay with us, we have many more real stories that will resonate with everyone. Health and true happiness to you.